An exchange between Dark Eldar and orcs is something that would be rather uncommon, but this situation is a little bit different. Each side's respective leaders had some rather impressive artifacts with them, so of course the Dark Eldar and orcs want their own respective artifacts back. So, pressed on by the incubi, the Dark Eldar did agree to an exchange with the orcs. Naz Dreg's forces took up positions throughout the various different buildings, boys strewn out here and there, and they let Vel'renn march straight through the center of town, heading towards the Dark Eldar lines. Seeing this, of course, the Dark Eldar did the same, releasing the 3 large orcs to head back towards theirs. Really, all it came down to was who was going to betray whom first. Surprisingly enough, the betrayal actually came from the orcs first. As Vel'renn was heading back to her lines, the big mech Flash Killa fired his shock attack cannon and hit Vel'renn and struck her to the ground unconscious before she was able to get into her venom. So this action, though gutsy, left the 3 leaders rather exposed. Now, the smart one, of course, was Zug, the weird boy who gated back and joined a large group of boys. Furious at the fact of being upstaged by a bunch of orcs, the Dark Eldar erupted in a hail of fire into the leaders. They did manage to kill off Flash Killa, but of course, the warlord himself, Naz Dreg, was only wounded and is heading towards the Dark Eldar lines. A few wounds here and there to a few of the vehicles, but nothing substantial. Bikes jumped up into some of the various different buildings to try and outflank and really get a good position on these orcs to take them down. The orcs, ever ready for combat, surged forth from some of their hiding places to engage the Dark Eldar. Some of them ran up, others moved only slightly to get a better firing position, while one of the trucks did move in closer, only to drop a small group of heavily armed orcs. Now, the war boss charged in and took down a raider, while the Ludus took out the venom. This venom here, of course, was taken out to small arms fire, dumping the witches to the ground. While the witches took position behind the building, Dakajet came on and fired on some of our various different units, not causing too much damage at the get-go, but the Razor Wing did come on earlier and managed to kill off a good number of the Ludas. The Warlord continuing through the lines, making a destruction in his path, the large orcs finally being taken out with a bunch of Deathcopters coming in close behind them. The orc truck staying close to its objective in hopes to keep its information secret. The witches maintaining their position behind the small building, ready to pounce on the orcs as they moved up and crept closer. Raider heading into the center of the table, firing in on the truck, not causing much damage, while the Scourge jumped in and cleaned off the last of the Ludas. The jet bike Reavers flew in and cleaned up the last of the few remaining Deathcopters after the Hellions jumped in and wiped out a large number of them, forcing them to run away. Even though they've lost a lot of their mobility, the Dark Eldar have still been able to strike a hard blow against the orcs. A large massive group of boys, tired of being held back, surged forth in hopes to collapse the right side of the Dark Eldar's flank, while the impressive fire from the Dakajet rips through the last remaining raider, dumping its few remaining warriors to the ground, with the orc truck finally turning and firing in on the Scourges, taking one of them out. The Razor Wing streaks back into the battle, firing in on some of the various orcs, only cutting a few down, not reducing their numbers before they head closer and closer to the witches. Scourges moving to the center of the battlefield, firing in on some of the various different orcs in the buildings. Warriors and Hellions holding the center as they could, while 2 small groups of warriors hold some small objectives near the back. Each uncovering some interesting information, but nothing too important, although the Reavers have discovered that there is something lying within some of these objectives, something important. Not to be slowed by a simple jet, the orcs on the right flank push towards the witches. The orcs in the center building disembark and charge towards the Scourges, cutting most of them down, leaving only one remaining. The Dakajet fired in on all the various different warriors in the center, cutting numbers of them down, leaving only a few remaining, while a few stragglers hold some objectives in the back of the Dark Eldar lines. Accepting their fate, the witches jump from their hiding spot to engage the orcs. Though most cut down, they are able to hold them in this position for just a little bit longer, trying to maintain that side of the flank. Razor Wing's Dark Lances destroying the truck, The Hellions moving up and firing in on the various different orcs while the Reavers try to capture and discover exactly what the objective is. What are these orcs hiding from them? Cutting down the last remaining witch, the orc boys continue along the Dark Eldar's right flank, closing in on the last few remaining warriors holding objectives. The Dakajet screams onto the table, firing in and destroying, almost wiping out the Hellions, while the orc boys finish off the last of the Reavers, but not before they were able to send out a message indicating there was something important within the city. Accepting the reality that the Dark Eldar have gathered as much information as they can, and they still have Vel'renn's unconscious body, they begin to withdraw and head back to their own lines, leaving few remaining Dark Eldar warriors to slow down the advance of the orcs so the remaining group can escape. Understanding the only way they're going to recoup this raid is if the Dark Eldar discover exactly what the orcs are hiding and capture it. So their next steps are to consolidate their forces, what's remaining of them, and venture once more against the orcs and bring back what they have. They're either going to return victorious or return as failures. That isn't going to look well in the eyes of this broken sigil. All in all, this could end with the Dark Eldar themselves joining in as volunteers, as members of the arena.